Hey everyone, welcome back to Valley of Secrets. I'm Nikki Ruth. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found the podcast, and welcome. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you to all of you who keep continuing to show up and support this podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to share something that I've been considering with you. I've actually been thinking about launching a Valley of Secrets fan club, a space for those of you who want early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content. It would be offered at a low monthly subscription cost, designed to be affordable while helping support the time and work that I put into producing this podcast. If that's something that you'd be interested in, I'd love to hear from you. So please comment on your streaming platform or send me a message on social media so I can gauge interest. Now, if you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2 of the series on Robert Willie Pickton, I recommend starting there before I get into today's episode. The last episode ended with Stitch's terrifying escape and with Willie walking free after the charges against him were dropped. Today, we go back to the late 1990s, back to Vancouver's downtown Eastside, a neighborhood that was already struggling with poverty, addiction, over-policing in some ways, and underprotection in others. Women worked the streets to survive. Some had families looking for them. Some had lost touch. Some were fighting battles that began long before drugs had ever entered the picture. And one by one, they began to vanish. A trigger warning. What we're about to talk about is disturbing. It involves violence against women, exploitation, drug addiction, and deeply traumatic details. Please take care of yourself while listening. Pause if you need to, and come back when you're ready. This is part 3 of the Robert Willie Pickton story. By the mid-1990s, Willie's farm in Port Coquitlam had become something more than just a pig farm. It was a gathering place, parties at Piggy's Palace, music blaring across muddy fields, men and women drifting in and out, very strange mix of outlaw glamour and rural decay. But while the parties were loud, the real horror was quiet. Moving between the farm and the downtown East Side was a woman named Gina Houston. Gina was a sex worker and had met Willie years earlier on the streets when Willie approached her and her friend, confidently introducing himself, and ended up picking up her friend to take back for sex work. Gina remembered his confidence and ease with picking up sex workers, something that most men did more cautiously. She didn't see him again until she attended one of the parties at Piggy's Palace years later. Willie didn't remember her, but they struck up a conversation and became friends. Gina was a single mother of 3 children. They were also close to Willie, especially her younger 2, even calling Willie Daddy. She described Willie as a gentle, polite, naive, and gullible man, the kind of man who would hand over his wallet if you told him a convincing enough story. Gina struggled with drug addiction and did what she had to survive. She engaged in survival sex work, and she privately fostered children because no official agency would place kids in her home. Money was inconsistent, food even more so. And when her cupboards were empty, Willie brought meat from the farm to her. When rent was overdue, he paid it. When bills piled up, he covered them. Later, she would testify that he had given her as much as $50,000 to $80,000. But Gina wasn't simply dependent on Willie. She saw opportunity in him. She prided herself on being a con artist, getting men to do things for her without even having to have sex. Willie just happened to be one of those marks. She told people that he was in love with her, that they were engaged. She painted herself as the woman who had captured the quiet pig farmer's heart. Yet, she later insisted they never had sex. They were more like friends, business partners, if you will. And part of that business involved introductions. Women on the downtown Eastside trusted Gina. She was one of them. She knew the rules of the street, and if she said Willie was safe, just a lonely farmer who paid cash and drugs, that reassurance meant something. It meant enough. In March 1997, 27-year-old Andrea Boerhaven disappeared. Andrea Faye Boerhaven was born on January 19, 1972, in Langley, BC, to Roger Boerhaven and Sharon Lockery. When her parents split up when she was young, she was placed into foster care. Stability was never something that she could count on, and as an adult, she survived the streets of Vancouver, known by the nickname Spider. She used cocaine and heroin and did sex work to support her addiction and herself. Andrea struggled throughout her whole life and was put in the Witness Protection Program in 1995 after surviving a brutal sexual assault. When she vanished, there was no urgent search effort. No headlines splashed across the city. She was just a woman from the downtown East Side, people said. Sadly, Andrea's DNA was eventually found on Willie's rubber boots that were seized by police after Stitch's attack. They also found her DNA on an earring with jewelry that was hidden under a floor vent in Willie's kitchen. Helen Hallmark was born on June 24, 1966 in Vancouver. She grew up with her brother and sister in Maple Ridge, BC, and she was known to be popular, a cheerleader with long dark blonde hair, hazel eyes, and a contagious smile. Friends described her as sophisticated yet worldly. But behind closed doors, she reported abuse at the hands of her mother's partner. She was rebellious, and for reasons unknown, at 13 she entered foster care. She stayed close to her siblings, trying to protect them as best as she could from their stepdad. At 19, she gave birth to a daughter and made the painful decision to place her up for adoption. She ended up marrying twice, but both of those marriages ended. And so eventually she found herself living at the Ho Den on the downtown East Side, addicted to drugs and engaging in sex work. On June 15, 1997, she vanished. Years later, forensic teams would find her DNA and blood splatter in Willie's bedroom, and on a cowboy hat hanging inside his closet. Just 10 days later, Janet Henry disappeared. Janet was born on April 10, 1961, the youngest of 11 children from the Kwakwakak First Nation. Her life had been marked by loss long before she even stepped onto the downtown East Side. Her father died in a boating accident when she was young, and the siblings were separated into different foster homes. One sister was brutally raped and murdered by 5 men in Nanaimo at 19 years of age. In 1990, her brother was struck and killed by a police car, leaving behind a wife and his children. Another sister ended up dying in 1991 by intentional overdose. Janet married Art in 1984, and they had a daughter named Deborah in 1985. Things seemed settled for a time, but they eventually divorced in 1988, and Art took Debbie with him. Janet started living with a new boyfriend in Vancouver who convinced Janet to start taking drugs, and then led her into sex work to pay for their addiction. He eventually died of an overdose, and Janet moved into the downtown East Side Hotel. Even then, she stayed close to her sister Sandra. They spoke daily, and they saw each other as often as they could. A few months before she went missing, a neighbor heard her scream and called 911. When the police found her, she had been so badly raped, beaten, and strangled that she barely survived. John Gary Sylvie was convicted for that attack. On June 25, 1997, Janet and Sandra had arranged to meet up for dinner, but Janet didn't show up. Sandra called the police to see if she had OD'd in her room, and when they entered, everything seemed to be in its place, but there was no Janet. Sandra strolled the downtown streets asking people if they had seen her sister, but no one had. Another one of their sisters, Dorothy, told Sandra that Janet had told her she frequented a party place at, quote, Uncle Willie's farm in Port Coquitlam, end quote. Sandra immediately called Lindsay Kynes, a crime reporter for the Vancouver Sun. He ran a story about her, but had not yet connected her to the missing woman from the downtown Eastside. Janet's life was full of trauma and hardship. Way too much for one person to go through. Janet's DNA was never conclusively found on the farm, but investigators believe she was one of Willie's victims. Around the same time, David Pickton, Willie's brother, was driving through the downtown Eastside himself. He approached a woman named Renata and offered her $100 for oral sex, which was more than double the usual price. He then exposed himself to prove he wasn't a cop. She refused. She said he smelled and he looked really dirty. He then tried to up the ante by offering her drugs as well. She still refused. She had said she only takes cash for her tricks. Feeling rejected, Dave asked if she knows anyone who would go back to the farm for his brother Willie. She could have the money and the drugs just for bringing someone. Renata immediately thought of Sherry Irving. Sherry was born March 19, 1973. She was Indigenous and part of the Lilwat First Nations. She had grown up between Edmonton and Vancouver Island, in between her two brothers. When she was young, she excelled at track and field, and according to one brother, she loved rock music and camping. When her father's military career moved the family to Ontario, Sherry stayed behind in British Columbia. Her parents would later split up, and her mother ended up dying in 1994. By the age of 19, she was addicted to crack cocaine, living on the downtown East Side at Renata's, and she was behind on rent. When Renata explained the arrangement to Sherry, $40 for Sherry, $60 toward her dad, plus the drugs, it felt like a solution to an immediate problem. Renata even offered to ride along as the rumors about women being killed was rampant. The last time she saw Sherry alive was as she stepped out of the truck and walked toward Willie, who stood waiting on the porch on the farm. Sherry's DNA would later be found inside one of the farm's freezers, and Renata would continue introducing women to David for Willie. By the end of 1997, at least 8 women had disappeared from the downtown East Side. Cynthia, known as Cindy Felix, was one of them. Cindy was born on December 12, 1955, in Detroit, Michigan. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her dad remarried to another woman, Marilyn, in 1960. The family moved to Vancouver, BC, and once Marilyn and Don divorced, Marilyn kept the children and raised them by herself. Don ended up moving to Florida at that time, and as a teenager, Cindy went to visit him. He met her with alcohol and drugs and attempted to sexually assault her, even pointing a gun at her. That trauma followed her back to Vancouver. She married in 1976 and had a daughter, Teresa, the following year. Both her and her husband started using hazardous drugs, and they eventually separated. Cindy tried to get clean many times, but addiction kept pulling her back. She stayed connected to her sister Audrey and her stepmother Marilyn, calling regularly and occasionally coming home for a hot meal, clean clothes, and a brief reset from the streets. Despite the chaos of her life, those family bonds endured. Cindy was honest about the reality she was living. She didn't romanticize it. She understood the risks that came with addiction and sex work and spoke openly about the dangers surrounding her. Complicating her life further was her immigration status. She never obtained Canadian citizenship, and in early 1997, she was deported twice on drug-related charges. She spent time in jail, yet each time she found her way back to Canada, back to the downtown East Side. The last known conversation she had with her family was in July of 1997. After that, the calls stopped. However, she was reportedly last seen in November that year. Her daughter reported her missing in 1998. Audrey, her sister, followed with an additional missing persons reports in 1999 and again in 2001, refusing to let her sister's disappearance be forgotten. Cindy's DNA would later be found on plastic liners and in 9 packages of ground pork in Willie's freezer. Marnie Leanne Frey was born August 30th, 1973. Her parents separated when she was still very young, and her Indigenous mother reportedly suffered from substance use. Much of her childhood was spent with her father in Campbell River, where he worked as a fisherman. Life there was shaped by the water and the woods. She went sport fishing with him, learned how to camp, how to move quietly through the forest, how to gut a fish and build a fire. The outdoors wasn't just a pastime, it was home. When she was 14, her stepmother, Lynn Frey, joined the household. By then, Marnie had already developed a reputation within her family for her connection with animals. She seemed to understand them instinctively. Injured birds, stray cats, farm animals. She was drawn to all of them. Lynn later described her as vibrant and full of energy. She loved arts and crafts, loved being outside, loved people. Eagles were her favorite. She admired their freedom, the way they soared high and alone. She felt a kinship there, a shared wild spirit. She was also generous to a fault. If another student at school didn't have something, Marnie would give it away, shoes, clothes, whatever she had. She didn't hold tightly to possessions. But as she moved further into her teens, changes began to surface. She reportedly started experimenting with drugs, marijuana, hash, and even stronger substances. A shift that would mark the beginning of a much more complicated chapter in her life. By 18, she had left home, and in 1992, at the age of 19, she had a daughter named Brittany, who ended up being raised by her father and Lynn. Marnie ended up falling into drug debt and moved into the Balmoral Motel on the downtown Eastside, escaping Campbell River. There, she went by the name Kit Kat on the streets. She did survival sex work and even went into pornography because it paid more, but she stayed in touch with her family the whole time. On August 29th, the day before her birthday, her dad and Lynn called her to say her birthday presents were on the way. After her birthday passed and they hadn't heard from her, they reported her missing. They were told there was little that could be done, and that was the pattern. Women disappeared, families searched, and police hesitated. Later during the search of the Pickton farm, Marnie's skeletonized and brittle partial right mandible with 3 of her teeth were found in the dirt in the slaughterhouse. Her DNA was also found in the wood chipper on the farm. It was believed that Willie fed some of his victims to the pigs. How absolutely horrible and disgusting. Now you all can understand why I said people would not want to eat pork for a long time after all of this came out. As 1997 was ending, Willie was still driving through the downtown Eastside, still circling the same blocks, still looking for a woman. But that year, something shifted. He began to feel unwell. Eventually, he went to a doctor, and the diagnosis was hepatitis C, a virus that attacks the liver and is most commonly spread through blood-to-blood contact, often through shared needles or contaminated drug equipment, and sometimes through unprotected sex where blood is involved. When he learned what it was, he didn't look inward. He looked for someone to blame. He told his friend Lisa Yelds that he must have contracted it from Stitch, the woman who had fought him off during the knife attack months earlier. He insisted it happened during the struggle, that her blood must have infected him. He spoke about it with resentment, still nursing that grudge from that night. There was no proof that Stitch even had hepatitis C, but infection rates were high among people struggling with addiction on the downtown East Side, especially those sharing needles. And it became an easy assumption, an easy target. And for Pickton, it was another justification to hold on to anger. The first woman to vanish in 1998 was Carrie Koski. Carrie Lynn Koski was 38 years old, born on August 14, 1959. She was a mother of 3. Her children were 12, 14, and 16 at the time of her disappearance. Years earlier, in 1987, her husband had taken his own life, leaving her to raise their children alone. And grief changed the course of her life. Her family loved her deeply. When they saw her at Christmas in Coquitlam in 1997, they hugged her tightly, but they could see the toll addiction had taken. She weighed maybe 90 pounds, her small frame fragile, her cheeks hollowed. And yet, they all said the same thing. Carrie was beautiful. She had a smile that could light up a room, and when she laughed, it was contagious. When she was younger, she had been full of life and warmth. But as her family put it, she always picked the wrong men. One of those men introduced her to heroin. And once heroin entered her life, it tightened its grip. She moved to the downtown Eastside and began living in one of the motels, and survival sex work became the focus. One day at a time, and then drugs, one fix at a time. In early January 1998, Carrie made plans with a friend. They were going to go for a walk in Stanley Park in Vancouver, and then get Chinese food, which was her favorite. But Carrie never showed up. Her friend tried calling around, asking other women if they had seen her, and then she called the welfare office to see if Carrie had picked up her check. She hadn't. January 7, 1998 was the last confirmed sighting of Carrie Koski. When her friend went to the police to report her missing, she was met with indifference. She later said officers were dismissive, that they suggested Carrie was probably just out partying. The receptionist at the front desk reportedly told her that they were, quote, just junkies and hookers, end quote, and to stop wasting police's time. Eventually, Carrie's DNA would be found on a pair of earrings, stored inside a bag hidden under the floor vent in the kitchen of Robert Willie Pickton. Only weeks later, another woman disappeared. Inga Monique Hall was 46 years old when she was last seen on February 26, 1998. Inga had immigrated to Canada from Germany when she was 4. Her family settled into Ontario, and as a teenager, she became rebellious. At 19, she ran away from home. She made her way to Prince George, BC, where she married a man from Alberta, and they had a daughter together. But the relationship ended, and somewhere along the way, heroin entered her life. Addiction reshaped everything. She became involved in sex work, and she later had another daughter with a different partner in BC. But by 1987, she too had drifted into the downtown East Side. Her life had moments of chaos, and at one point she attempted to rob a bank with a plastic gun, an act that spoke less of criminal mastermind and more of desperation. By early 1998, she was another woman trying to survive in a neighborhood that was growing more dangerous by the month. When Inga disappeared, it did not make front-page news. There was no citywide searches, just like many of the other women who had gone missing. Later, investigators would find Inga's DNA inside 9 packages of ground pork in a freezer on Pickton's farm. Clumps of her hair were discovered in a plastic bag in the slaughterhouse as well. The brutality of that detail is difficult to comprehend. On April 13, 1998, 43-year-old Bernie Dubois was celebrating his birthday in a way that felt ordinary for the life he lived. A couple of drinks, a few people drifting in and out of the small 2-bedroom house on Princess Street. The place was well known in the neighborhood. Some called it a flop house, others called it the crack shack. If you needed drugs, you knew where to knock, and if you were looking for a woman, you knew that too. Bernie was known on the streets as a pimp and a dealer. It was a hard, chaotic world, and it was the world he shared with Sarah DeVries. Sarah hadn't been there for his birthday. She had been working. But the early morning hours of April 14th, the day after his birthday, she came running back into the house. According to Bernie, she told him she felt bad about missing his birthday and would be back later so they could celebrate properly. It was the last time he saw her. But Sarah's story had begun long before Princess Street. She was born on May 12, 1969. At just 11 months old, she was adopted, officially placed with her new family on April 10, 1970. They lived in West Point Grey, one of Vancouver's most affluent neighborhoods at the time. Her adoptive father was a professor at the University of British Columbia. Her adoptive mother, Pat, was a respected head nurse at Vancouver General Hospital. She was one of 4 siblings. Her aunt, her mother's sister, was Jean Little, a beloved Canadian children's author who had been blind since birth. From the outside, it looked like Sarah had been given every possible opportunity. But belonging isn't something you can assign on paper. Sarah was of mixed heritage: white, black, Mexican, and Indigenous. In a predominantly white neighborhood and school, she stood out. And the racial slurs came early. So did the bullying. What should have been a safe suburban childhood slowly became something else: isolating, painful, confusing. She was strikingly beautiful even as a young girl, with almond-shaped eyes, caramel skin, dark long curly hair framing her face. But beauty didn't shield her from feeling different. When her parents divorced in 1978, something shifted. Sarah was still a child, but she internalized the fracture. Family members would later say she blamed herself. After the separation, she became more withdrawn, and by 12 or 13 years old, she was shoplifting. Her parents felt forced to lock their bedroom doors to prevent her from taking things. There were darker suspicions, too. Her sister Maggie would later voice a belief that Sarah had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor during those years. Whether confirmed or not, trauma seemed to echo through Sarah's adolescence, and eventually she ran. She gravitated toward the downtown core, first experimenting with cocaine, then heroin. And by 17, she was fully immersed in street life, and I moved in with Bernie Dubois on Princess Street, in a small house that had become infamous in the neighborhood. The contrast between West Point Grey and Princess Street could not have been more stark. In 1990, Sarah gave birth to her and Bernie's daughter, Jeannie. Her mother stepped in and raised the child, providing the stability Sarah couldn't have at the time. In May 1996, she gave birth to a son named Ben. He was not Bernie's child. He had been conceived through rape from one of the Johns. And like his sister, Ben went to live with Sarah's mother. Despite everything, addiction and the streets, Sarah did not disappear from her children's lives. She visited, she wrote letters, she tried in her own way to hold on to that connection. Even in the depths of addiction, there were parts of her that remained disciplined as well. She exercised, she ate well, she took vitamins, and she wrote constantly. Letters, reflections, and poetry. Words were her anchor, and through them you could see her intelligence, her vulnerability, and her longing for something different. While on the streets, Sarah had been attacked before. One night, a John turned violent and beat her so badly that she was left shaken for weeks. It wasn't just the bruises, it was the realization. Women she knew were disappearing from the downtown Eastside with terrifying regularity. Friends she had laughed with, worked beside, shared food and drugs with were simply gone. And Sarah was not someone on the fringes of that community. She was deeply connected. People loved her. She had many friends, former lovers, and allies. She knew the streets intimately, which meant she also knew the danger. In one haunting journal entry, she wrote, "Woman's bodies beaten beyond recognition. Am I next? Is he watching me now? Stalking me like a predator and its prey, waiting for the perfect spot, time, or my stupid mistake. How does one choose a victim? Good question, isn't it? If I knew that, I would never get snuffed." She sensed it. The fear wasn't abstract, it was personal. On April 14, 1998, Sarah was walking the downtown Eastside with her friend Sylvia. They had shared a speedball earlier that evening, which is heroin and cocaine mixed together, then headed towards Hastings and Princess to work. Sylvia was picked up first. and when she returned, Sarah was gone. They had been watching each other's backs, spotting as they called it, and in the brief window when Sylvia was away, Sarah vanished. Years later, forensic evidence would connect her directly to Willie Pickton. Her DNA was found on lipstick and on a white purse recovered from his property. A used condom containing both her DNA and his was also identified. But in those early days, her disappearance was just another file. Another missing woman from the downtown Eastside. One man refused to let it fade quietly. His name was Wayne Lang. Wayne had once been Sarah's lover, but over time, their relationship evolved into a deep friendship. Wayne was madly in love with her. He paid for her drugs when she was sick and in withdrawal, and he helped her when she needed shelter. But Sarah had been honest with him. She wanted friendship and nothing more. Wayne accepted it, even if it hurt. On April 13th, the day before she disappeared, Wayne spoke to her on the phone. And later that evening, he picked her up and brought her to his home, a place where she had once lived. Many of her clothes, journals, and personal belongings were still there. She gathered a few things before Wayne drove her back downtown, dropping her near the Beacon Hotel. That was the last time he saw her. When Sarah didn't resurface, Wayne was worried. So he reported her missing to Constable David Dixon, who was a community cop on the downtown East Side. Dave Dixon then took Wayne to the Vancouver Police Department so that he could file a report. But they told him he wasn't able to because he wasn't family. So Sarah's sister Maggie came forward to officially report her missing. Then they noticed something that made the fear real. Sarah hadn't cashed her welfare check, and for someone living day to day, that was unthinkable. Wayne refused to sit still. He set up a toll-free tip line dedicated to finding Sarah. He plastered posters, he pushed, and he demanded attention. On July 28, 1998, the tip line rang. The caller was a man named Bill Hiscox. Bill had worked for a company connected to the Pickton family and had spent considerable time on the farm in Port Coquitlam. His background was troubled, a criminal record, time spent in youth facilities as a child. During one of those stays, he crossed paths with Lisa Yelds, remember Willie's ex-best friend. Bill claimed Lisa was like a foster sister to him, though she would later deny that closeness and say she didn't care for him at all. Regardless, she had introduced him to the Pickton brothers and helped him secure work on the farm. During the call with Wayne, Bill spoke about a disturbing incident involving a woman named Stitch. He mentioned that Willie lived on a sprawling 25-acre property, a place large enough, he said, to hide and bury almost anything. He described Willie as strange, peculiar, off. Most chillingly, Bill claimed that Lisa had told him there were women's ID cards, purses, and clothing scattered all around the property. Wayne took this information seriously. Bill also relayed his concerns directly to the Vancouver Police Department, which they told him they would check into Willie Pickton. But as history would later show, nothing meaningful was done by the VPD at the time. Only one community police officer, Constable David Dixon, the same one that Wayne had gone to first, would care enough and notice that so many women were going missing off the downtown East Side, and start to take action in finding out who was responsible. Sadly, not before many more women vanish. As we come to the end of today's episode, I want to pause and acknowledge the woman we spoke about today. Woman who endured unimaginable hardships. Woman who navigated poverty, addiction, violence, and systemic failure, and who still deserved safety, dignity, and the chance to grow older. They deserve to be remembered by name. Andrea Borhaven, Helen Hallmark, Janet Henry, Sherry Irving, Cynthia Felix, Marnie Frey, Carrie Koski, Inga Hall, Sarah DeVries. These were not headlines. They were people who were loved. If you can take a moment with me right now to say their names and hold space for them. Because remembering them, speaking about them, is one small way we push back against the silence that surrounded their disappearances for too long. Thanks for listening to Part 3 of the Robert Willie Pickton case. Join me in 2 weeks for Part 4, where I will talk about more missing women and police's continued failures in catching the pig farmer. If you would like to contribute to this podcast, you can donate a small monthly fee. The link is in my bio on social media or in the show notes. Like I said, any amount is appreciated. You can also find photos of this case on my Instagram and Facebook at Valley of Secrets Podcast. Stay safe, stay aware, and stay curious.